So one type of indicator that many new traders will usually use, or at least become familiar with, and some seasoned traders continue to use it for their entire career, is the relative strength index. The relative strength index is an indicator that helps show, basically it's used for mean reversion. Usually it can be used in different ways, but essentially the idea behind the relative strength index is that you're giving every bar of the chart kind of a grade, and this is what the index part is, right? And in that grade tells you how strong that bar is or how weak it is. And this is relative, right? That's why it's called relative strength index, because it's relative to a certain number of bars before that. So essentially what happens is you use this formula to look at a certain number of bars behind the current bar. So let's say this is our current bar. We're going to look at how this bar compares with a certain number of bars behind it. And it's going to give it a score saying how relatively strong or weak it is, which would then give you, the trader, kind of an idea of whether it's time to buy or sell, or do nothing, of course. And then as we move forward to the next bar, right, it's shifting like this. So every new bar, it calculates, and this window of look back is rolling forward with it. So you're not going back to the very first bar and calculating all of them. You're calculating only a certain number of bars behind the current one. So it just kind of keeps giving grades moving forward like this. So that's the idea of the relative strength index. And of course, the usage of this, usually this would be used for mean reversion. It kind of tells you when a trend is kind of getting to its extremes, which would be considered kind of an overbought condition, in which case that's telling you you should probably think about selling pretty soon. If you're in a move, right, and it gets into overbought, you might want to try to exit. Or if you're trying to catch the mean reversion, right, this might be your entry where you go short when you get to an overbought condition. And the same thing on the opposite side with the oversold condition, right? This is telling you if you're riding a trend, you might want to exit, or if you're looking to catch that reversion, this might be a good entry for you when it's oversold. So those are the concepts of the RSI. All right, so now that we have an idea of what we want to start coding, let's flip over to the chart, or to the editor, and start working on it. Before we dive into the RSI specific code, let's talk about how to organize a script. So this is how I organize my scripts. Of course, we talked in the previous video about the 3 essential elements of any script. You have to have the version, you have to have the type of script, and you have to have some kind of visual component. Those are the absolutely crucial non-negotiables, right? You have to have those in your script. So let's talk about, though, how we can keep this organized and clear, so that if you're not familiar with coding, you might not realize how quickly you can start getting confused by your own code. These things can get pretty long, pretty complicated, and so it's important to have some kind of framework that can help you to stay on track, and also for future you to come back and understand what it is that you did in that code. So the way that I do this in pinescript is that I have certain sections, right? So I have the declarations section, and that would be this up here. It includes the version and the name of the indicator. Then I'll have pretty much always a user inputs section, and this is where you can add in some settings that users of the script can use without having to come back and hard code things in. So this is very useful, especially as you start getting fancier with your scripts. Then the next section would be custom types. And if you're not familiar with what a type is, there are different kinds of things that can exist, kinds of objects inside of your script. So it could be numbers, it could be tables, it can be visual elements. It can be all kinds of different things. And usually a custom type will have a bunch of the different standard things kind of put together. So let's say for whatever reason in your script you wanted to create an object called dog, right? And dogs have several different characteristics such as a breed, a weight, a height, and yeah, I don't know, color, right? So you might make a custom type called dog, and it has all those elements, and it allows you to kind of quickly kind of cycle through different iterations or different objects that you might need to access later. So this is not necessary. You do not have to have custom types, but oftentimes in my scripts I do. Similarly, custom let me see if I can type this correctly. Custom methods, that's kind of like custom types in the sense that a custom method is just a group of lines that kind of execute together to achieve some kind of goal. So a custom type would be like an object that you want to create, and a custom method is kind of a thing that you want to do that you might have to do more than once or over and over again, right? Instead of having to type it over and over again or copy and paste it a bunch of times, you could just declare a custom method, and then you can call it very easily later in your script. So again, because pinescript is executed from top to bottom, you do need to declare all these things higher up in the script, literally like earlier in the script than these further sections, such as the core logic section. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So you also need to have your variables. So this would be any kind of values that you need to store and reference later. The variables should be declared up here, again, because later on the script, when you want to call on them, they need to already exist higher up in the script. So then you get to your core logic. This is where you actually do all the stuff in your script that you want to do. And this is usually divided into subsections for me because core logic can get pretty long and complicated. Therefore, having it broken into subsections that are clearly labeled and described is also very important. Then finally, at the end is where I usually put my visuals. So things like this plot are going to be in the visuals. So just to take a look here, again, declarations, inputs, custom stuff, variables, then your core logic. This will be kind of your main section, and then your visuals at the end. Once you have this set up, we're ready to get started. So now that we have the structure established for our script, we can go ahead and start building our RSI indicator. First thing that you want to do always is make sure that you can save your work. I don't know how many times I have lost things over the years, whether it's coding or just homework and stuff. I'm sure you've been there as well. Make sure that you have this thing ready to save, and it will not save until you've given it a name and saved it up here. So let's call it my RSI indicator, and then we'll save it up here, and it should fill it in with the title you typed in here. If not, you can just type it, click save, and now this will save basically every time that you click update or add to chart. So we'll start with just, since it automatically populates all the required elements, we can just go ahead and test it and click on add to chart, and you'll see that what it's doing right now is the only thing that it's doing is it gave itself a name, and then it plots the closing price. So you can see down here that you've got the prices, same as up here, and it's just showing you where the closing prices are, and it's drawing a line to draw that along. So obviously that's not what we want. What we want is the RSI. So we need to start thinking about kind of how we can start building the RSI. The very first thing that we need to do is we are going to need to declare some variables because we need to be able to save some values in order to plot them here. So first thing we need is, of course, we're going to want some kind of value for the RSI. And this value, the RSI, is going to be a float, right? That is basically, it's a number. And you can initialize this to basically anything you want. It doesn't really matter because we are going to reassign it in our core logic, but we do need to have that variable declared up here. So we got our float, RSI, and we have it set to 0 for now. Then in the core logic area, which again, all of this runs on every single bar, right, from top to bottom. So the first thing it comes across is here's our RSI number, or our RSI variable, and we are going to change that by saying RSI, oops, I put FSI, RSI, and then you need to put colon equals. This is how you change the value of something that already has a value. So since we created RSI up here and we set it to 0, we need to change that value of 0 to something else. And what are we going to change it to? We will change it to, of course, we're going to do our RSI calculation. Now, we could hard code in the math and do it the hard way. There's a lot of mathematical formulas that go into this, and so it could be very complicated. Luckily for us, TradingView has built pinescript with some of these built-in common methods already accessible to us in a library called TA. So that stands for technical analysis. So you type TA and you put period, and you should come across all these built-in methods. So you've got everything, a lot of things in here. So you got the Bollinger Bands, you've got crossovers, you got moving averages, all kinds of different things in here. So if you keep scrolling down, you'll eventually find RSI. So you click on that and it will automatically fill in and open up some parentheses, because this particular method, it requires 2 inputs. You can see that up here. So we got TA RSI is saying this is how you should be typing this into your code. So you need to provide a source with a comma, and then you need to tell it the length of this calculation. So we'll start with source. Source is the value, the thing that you need to feed it that it's going to do all the mathematical calculations on. So right now we have a few options, right? We could do open, high, low, close. Those are kind of the basic sources. So of course we don't want to do it on the highs or the lows or anything like that. We want to do it on the closing prices. So we just type close, and you can see that close is if you hover over it, it is a built-in variable, right? And it is the closing price of the current bar, or it's the last traded price of a yet incomplete real-time bar. So when this is running on a live chart, close also refers to the current price, right? Not just the closing price. It doesn't have to wait for the bar to close. It will calculate it on the ongoing bar. So you'll also notice that this is a series float, right? Remember we talked about that earlier in the series, that this series thing means that it is calculated on every bar, and that those values are stored from every bar, meaning that you can reference them from any bar. You can go back and reference previous bars. For now, we don't need to do that. We just need to know what the current bar's close is, which means we just type close and that's it. We don't need anything else. We can just type our comma and move on to our next input, right? Our next input for this method, which is length. And this tells you the number of bars, right? How long, how many bars back do you want to include in this calculation? So the standard for this is 14. So we'll just use the kind of standard RSI calculation. So we're going to use the closing prices, and we're going to look at the last 14 closing prices to give us an index of the current bar's relative strength. So last thing we need to do is, instead of plotting the closing price, right, we don't want it to plot close. We want it to plot this value, the RSI. So instead, we will feed it RSI, and let's check our chart and see how it looks. So we look over here, and you can see now we have our scale score, our index, right, from 0 to 100. I know it doesn't show actually all those values because it's kind of stuck in this range here between 30 and 70, but this is working appropriately. So far so good. All right, now that we have our basic RSI plotted on the chart, there are numbers on the side that basically translate into the information that we were talking about earlier about being overbought or oversold. So usually anything over 70 or 80 is considered overbought, and anything under 20 to 30 is considered oversold. So usually what you're going to find on an RSI indicator is a horizontal line that indicates when things are overbought or oversold, and usually there's also a midline drawn in here so you can see when basically you're not getting a clear signal to buy or sell, that it's kind of balanced price. The strength is in the middle of the range. So let's see what we can do to add those in. So we go over to our Pine editor. We can see down here in our visuals section, we want to add on some lines, right? We want to draw lines, so we should put that in the visual section. Now, we don't need to plot those lines though, because a plot allows you to plot a series float. So plots a series of data on the chart. So a series is something that changes, like every bar it has a different value, right? So the line can go up and down and it can move all kinds of things. We don't really need that here. All we need is a straight line that goes all the way across at a certain value, right? And so instead of using a plot, we can use what's called an H line, right? Which stands for horizontal line. And you can see when we open up our parentheses that it's asking for several different inputs. You do not have to put all of these inputs in here. Some of them are required, such as price, of course. You need to know where to draw the line. But other than that, all these other ones are basically styles, things that you can change, the settings that you can change to change how it looks or things like that. So let's start with just a very basic, right? We want to draw a horizontal line at the middle, like right in the middle, at the 50% line, or not, it's not a percentage, but at the value of 50. So we can just type that here. We click update on chart and we go and check it, and you can see now we have a horizontal line right at the 50. Now we can do the same thing, and we can copy and paste that a couple times, so we can add 3 lines, right? We want one for overbought and one for oversold. Like I said earlier, the overbought level is usually 70 or 80, so I'll put that to 70, and the oversold is usually 20 or 30, so I'm going to use 30 right now. So I can update that on the chart and check it out, and you can see now we have 3 lines, one at 70, one at 50, one at 30. That's good progress. So now we have, in addition to our regular RSI line, we also have some kind of guidelines to show us where this price or this index currently sits. Anytime that it peaks above 70, it's basically indicating that price is likely to turn back around and come back down. And similarly, when it gets below 30, price is likely to turn around and come back up. So this signal, though, can be pretty jagged. You see that it kind of goes up and down, and it's very choppy. So a lot of times what people will also include on an RSI is a moving average to kind of smooth out that line and give you a clearer view of what's going on. So let's see what we can do inside the charts, or in the editor. So what we're going to need is we need another variable, right? Because this is going to be another thing, another value that we need to store and then plot onto our chart. So we need to declare that, give it a name. So this is also going to be a float. That means that this is a number that has decimals, right? That's what float means, versus an integer or an int, right, is a whole number. It doesn't have any fractions, any decimals after it. So that's kind of the difference between an int and a float. In this case, we do need it to be a float in order to plot it on the chart. So I'm going to call this the RSI moving average. Just to make it very clear, I like to have my things named very clearly. So again, we can initialize this value to 0, and then we'll reassign it down here in the core logic section. So we want RSI moving average, and we're going to use the colon and the equals sign because we're reassigning it. We're changing the value of this, so we need to have that colon equals. We're going to change that to, again, we're going to use a technical analysis method, one of the built-ins. And what we want now is a moving average. So there are several different kinds that you can use. You can use simple or exponential or weighted. There are several different kinds. Let's just keep it simple, and we're going to use a simple moving average for this one. And the abbreviation for that is SMA. So TA.SMA, and then we open our parentheses and we look again. We've got two inputs required. So we have source and length, just like with the RSI. So what is our source? This is the value that we want to calculate the moving average on. In this case, we don't want to use the closing price because we're trying to get a smoothed out line of the RSI value itself. So we're going to pass in the RSI value so that we can get an average of the RSI value. And again, we want to set a certain length for this. And this can be basically anything you want. The shorter this length or the smaller this number is, the kind of choppier the signal is going to be, and the more kind of false signals that you're going to get. On the other hand, you can set it to a higher value, but the higher value that you set the moving average to, you're going to get a smoother line and you're going to get fewer false signals, but you're just going to get fewer signals altogether, right? Because it takes so long, and you're going to get late signals. I guess that's maybe a better way to think of it, right? The longer this average is, the later your signal is going to come, but the more reliable it's going to be. The lower that number is, the faster the signal will be, but you're going to get false signals along with it. So kind of a standard set of options here would be like 5 or 9 or 20 or 50 or 100, right? So right now, I think let's just go with a 20 period and see how that looks. Although, if we just click update chart right now, you'll see that there is nothing on here because we haven't plotted it yet. So we do need to add that in. So we need to add another plot, and we're going to put the RSI moving average. So now it's going to plot the RSI and the moving average along with these horizontal lines. So we update the chart. And you can see now we got this nice smooth line kind of smoothing out the RSI signal. But you notice that it never quite gets up into these overbought or oversold areas, right? So this is what I was saying about with a 20 period moving average, you're going to get later delayed signals, and in some cases just none at all. So that is that's working properly so far, so we're making progress. So now we have the RSI signal, the RSI moving average, and we have horizontal lines to give us an idea about where we are in terms of the index, whether it's overbought, oversold, or somewhere in the middle. So at this point, we have all the core functionality of an RSI indicator is written. However, we have a few things that are kind of missing from it. So first of all, you'll notice that with our moving average, that this is not giving us any signals, right? Which could be an okay thing for you, or it could be something you'd want to change. Same thing for the RSI. It's kind of jagged. Maybe you'd want to use a different value besides 14. Maybe you'd want to use a different look back for the moving average besides 20, so you get more or less signals, or all kinds of different reasons why you might want to change some of those different values. However, as it stands right now, if you go into the settings, there is nothing you can change. You can change where the lines are drawn, but you can't change anything about the core functionality of the RSI as it stands right now. So let's see what we can do about that. So if we come into our editor, we can go back to our user inputs area, right? That's where we're going to be able to specify some inputs that will create a new tab inside of the settings here. So inside of here, we need to, again, declare what the user input is going to be stored as. In this case, we need integers, right? Whole numbers we need to be able to type in a whole number. It can't be 14.5 or 14.67 or something like that. It has to be a whole number. So we want to declare an integer, and we're going to call this the RSI length. And we need to set that to be equal to an input from the user, and we want to force the user to input an integer, right? So we're saving an integer, so this needs to match this as well. So then inside of our method, we have to set a default value, which right now we have it set to 14, so let's just leave it there. And then we need to give it a title so that when people go into the settings, they will know what they're looking at, what they're supposed to be typing into that field. So let's call it RSI length. That's all we need. There are other options for things that you can specify about this input, but really this is all you need, at least for right now. Then we will also do the same thing for the RSI moving average length. So we want a input of an integer, and we defaulted that one to 20. So we'll do the moving average length. Then, in order to make sure that we're actually using these values, instead of hard coding them in, now instead of typing 14, we can type RSI length. And now whatever the user has specified, it could still be 14 or it could be something else. Now the script will use whatever this value is. And similarly for the moving average, we can pass in the RSI MA length. And now when we update this on the chart, we should see that nothing will change right now because we've used the same default values. However, what will change is that we now have in our settings a new tab called inputs, and you've got the RSI length and the moving average. So if we fiddle with these numbers, we should see it immediately on the chart. So let's go ahead and change this to something much lower, say like 9. And you can see that this has changed. You can see how it's less smooth now. The moving average line, it is a little more jagged, but it is also a lot more responsive to the RSI prices. Similarly, we can change the RSI length. So instead of using 14, we could also reduce that one down to something like, say, 5, right? Get pretty extreme. You should see very jagged values now, as, of course, with 5, you're going to get a lot of volatility in this signal. Whereas if we increased it to something like 21, all right, we are going to see the opposite, right? A lot more smoothing effect of that signal. So now that we've got those inputs put in, we can do something similar for these horizontal lines in case somebody wants to use something besides 70 or 30 for their overbought and oversold conditions. So we can do similar numbers here. I think those are going to be floats though. So let's just double check here. Yeah, the price. So we do need to put those in as floats. So we'll do overbought level, and we'll put input dot float, and that will be 70 is the default. Overbought level, and then we'll do the same thing. Oversold level equals input float, and set that one to 30. Oversold level, and then we can pass those values in for the plots. Overbought level and oversold level. Then we update our chart, and we should now be able to change those as well. So we've got overbought and oversold. We can change this to 80 and 20, and you see that changes on the chart. So everything's working perfectly. Good job. So at this point, our relative strength index indicator is working pretty much as intended. It has all the necessary elements of a RSI line, it has a moving average line, and it has the overbought, oversold, and midpoints all plotted on the chart. So in terms of functionality, everything is going pretty well. We also have user inputs so that we can change some of that functionality as needed. For instance, 80 and 20 are a little more extreme, so let's go ahead and change those back to 70 and 30 to get us back into a more of a normal range. Now, what I don't love about the way this indicator is right now is just it's pretty ugly, to be honest. Two blue thin little lines kind of moving around. We could make this a little bit easier to use and to look at, a little more appealing, and a little bit more informative in terms of what you can do. The most basic thing would be, I'd say, using colors. So let's go ahead and change some of the colors for these indicators. And you can do that here in the style, right? So we could change this to white and orange, and you can change the line style, you can change the thickness, you can change the type of line. All these kind of things can be done in here, but as soon as you close TradingView and then open it again, you may end up losing all that styling that you've done. And you might have to reload it in and manually do it every time. So not the end of the world, but not ideal either, especially since we can go ahead and set some defaults to make it look pretty just by default. So let's go ahead and get started on that, starting with colors. So in the script, you'll come down here to the visuals, because we're just going to change some of the settings for these visuals, and we're going to go into this method, the plot method, and we're going to add a comma so that we can specify some more settings. Now, there are all kinds of other settings in here, and they all can be useful for different purposes, but for right now, really all we want to worry about is color. So the way to change that is, instead of having to fill in every single one of these things, you can just specify which one you want to change by just typing that particular parameter. So in this case, we want to type color equals, right? So now it knows that we're targeting the color parameter, and we need to fill it in with a color. So which color do we want? So the way to do that is you need to say specifically color, right? And then you have all the different options for which colors you can use, right? So not an overwhelming number of color options, but you can get basically what you need done. So let's go with white. I like the regular RSI color to be white. And then for the plot, for the moving average, let's give that a contrasting color. So we'll use something like color.orange, right? So we'll have a white RSI and an orange moving average. So let's take a look at how that looks on the chart. So that's looking pretty good. Definitely like the contrast, so it's easy to tell the difference between the RSI and the moving average. So that's great. A couple other colors that I would change are the overbought and oversold conditions as well. So for the overbought level, because that is essentially telling us to sell, right, I'm going to use color equals color dot red. And then in the oversold condition, which is basically telling us to buy, let's use color equals color dot green. So now when we update the chart, we can see we have red overbought, green oversold, white RSI, and an orange moving average. All right, I like those colors much better, and now when we open the indicator, it will default to these colors. Another thing that I'm not really wild about in terms of the appearance of this indicator is the line styles. So you'll notice that with the moving average, it's a little thin, and because to me the moving average is kind of the more important thing over the RSI, I like to make that stand out a little bit more. And the way I like to do that is to make it thicker. So if we go into the script, we can go into our RSI moving average plot and add a comma. Now what we want to do is target this line width. So we type line width equals, and then it's asking us for a integer, right? It wants to know the number. The default value is 1. So if I put 3, it's going to be basically 3 times thicker than the line that's currently on there. So let's look at how that looks. And I think that is nice and bold, very easy to see, really jumps off the chart while not obscuring necessarily the actual RSI signal behind it. So I like the way that this looks. What I don't like is these dashed lines. I'm not a fan of dashed lines. I like dotted personally a lot better. So I'm going to go ahead and change that now. All my horizontal lines are going to be dotted instead of dashed. So here in these horizontal line plots, we need to specify the line style. So we say line style equals, and then it tells you how to put this in. You need to input some kind of H-line style, and you've got really three options here: H-line style solid, dotted, or dashed. So we're going to type H-line dot style dotted, and we're going to use that same style for all three plots. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in. Take a look over here on the chart, and that's much better. I like these dotted lines a lot better. One last thing that I might try to change is also for the signal price. Instead of having just this continuous jagged number where really when you hover over it, you kind of got to guess at where that is, because you got to look at the slope and find the exact point. It's a little difficult to see, so we can clarify that by changing that line style to something else. So up here with this plot, we can change this style, which is different, right? We're using a plot. So down here you had to use line style, but for the plot you use just regular style without the line. So just a weird syntax difference that exists in pinescript. So here are the possible values, right? All kinds of different values that we can use here, but we'll put plot dot style. And I like the step line because that way it's very clear where the changes are. So let's take a look at how that goes. So now you can see how these values are changing over time, right? At any given moment, it's very clear that this value is separate from that value, and so on and so forth. So I like the way that this looks a lot better. And this basically concludes our RSI indicator. At this point, we have covered everything. We've got all the functionality. It looks pretty, and yeah. So congratulations if you followed along and you got through this tutorial. Next, we will move on to a new indicator to keep learning pinescript. Hope to see you there.